The goal of the Digital Library of the Middle East is to create a federated website that will make millions of records about the cultural heritage of the Middle East accessible worldwide. The DLME combats looting and the illicit sale of material by cultural racketeers through registration and improved tracking of objects' provenance. Finally, post-conflict, the DLME is designed to increase global knowledge capacity by facilitating research, teaching, and fresh discovery. The loss of cultural heritage is an urgent problem, and the Digital Library of the Middle East is part of the solution. Here's where we stand halfway through the programming sprint.
So what I'm going to talk about specifically is what we're doing for this particular prototype. The overall need is really to build a functional demonstration application that will allow us to sort of see what something like DLME could take shape. I think we're anticipating a mix of pathways and content into something like DLME over the long run, but most of what we're focusing on right now is metadata aggregation. DLME is also sort of a larger conceptual project and could include things like digitization, curation of content, and things like that. So the elevator pitch that we've come up with for the project is that for current and potential DLME partners who want to see the potential value of the project, the DLME prototype is a functional demonstration for Middle East and North African cultural materials that will serve as a catalyst for future contributions and help identify potential gaps and requirements for future phases of the project. Unlike other initiatives, the prototype provides curation and interpretation functionality. In terms of trade-offs, I'm going to make this really fast, just in the interest of time. We usually try to come up with a set of trade-offs for the project, and I'll share the link to these slides, and then we can talk about it more later if you have any specific questions. But we're trying to narrow scope as much as possible, but really show, ideally show high quality records that can demonstrate, possibilities of leveraging things like IIF and embed. We know it's important for us to have a publicly accessible demo instance. We are trading off the user friendliness of indexing tools for the time being and using this as sort of as I've indicated, kind of as a discovery process for us to look at what developing more generalizable indexing tools would look like. We'd like to work on production-ready ingest processes. We've been talking about ways to sort of stage records, like possibly pushing into an S3 bucket, and something going to make it easy for Wayne, and sort of once this work cycle concludes, we have a way to add more records. Again, we would like to demonstrate viewing content in a number of different ways as much as possible. Again, leveraging IIF and embed, and then it's honestly a pretty high priority for us that we start to figure out what we're not able to do in this work cycle.
We started this project 2 weeks ago by spinning up a new GitHub repository at tool.dlss/DLME. It's a Spotlight-based application. Spotlight is a project we started here at Stanford 3 or 4 years ago to provide kind of self-service tools for curators and others to showcase their digital content. And we're hoping that will satisfy some of the contextualization needs as part of this project. We've decided to deploy this application into AWS, Amazon Web Services, using Elastic Beanstalk, and we've configured it for continuous deployment so that every time we make a commit to this DLME repository, in a handful of minutes, it will be reflected in our demo website at spotlight.dlme.clir.org. Right now in our Spotlight exhibit, we've loaded a handful of fixture objects and have started loading some of Stanford's mods records. So I can do a search here and we can see several examples of content, including some with thumbnails. I think this is going to be our fixture object. And if it is, so when I click through here, we can see one example of a viewer. This could be a book viewer. Yeah, take a look at the book embedded in our aggregation website. We also have examples of 3D models, and taking advantage of the OEmbed protocol, we're able to embed that in much the same way and browse around and take a look at, in this case, this statue. And our final example of a viewer so far are just using ordinary IIIF backed images. This Princeton, in this case, has a IIIF API compatible endpoint, and so we're able to pull their image into our website. I mentioned earlier the ability for curators to kind of contextualize material. In this case, we only have a homepage, but there's a what you see is what you get editor, where the curator can add content. They could choose to pull in particular types of records. And incorporate them into these pages. And also build out various types of pages and browse categories and all sorts of things to make these records more discoverable. Curators can also use their dashboard in order to update things like the appearance of the website, perhaps changing the titles and masthead images, customizing search and discovery characteristics. They can choose what fields enable for search. I'll turn on these titling creator contributor fielded search for metadata that supports it, that will make more targeted searching possible. We have facets, the ability for curators and others to customize the metadata fields that display, perhaps changing the order, perhaps changing the labels from this DC rights, just rights, for example, to make it more user accessible. We've also built the ability to add, for now, raw JSON documents and our intermediate representation directly from the website. We've also done a lot of work building backend tools for converting data into this intermediate representation and loading it into Spotlight.
The intermediate representation is a way for us to prototype mapping.
So it's a JSON document, which is roughly, it is not JSON LD and it is not RDF, but it follows the Europeana data model. The application profile we developed follows the Europeana data model very closely, although is not quite as expansive in terms of all of its possibilities. So one of the things that we're able to do with this intermediate representation is really just even look at an item page in like a digital library interface and then try to figure out how to mock up something like a fixture object. This also allows us to build out fixture objects for things which are a little bit more complex. So for example, identifying where there's IIIF resource. But one of the upshots of that again is we haven't always figured out how to necessarily get to identify IIIF resources, even if we know they exist, because there's often a process of translating one ID to another or getting some sort of page sequence information if manifests aren't available for what the first image in the sequence is. But this is not what the Solr documents look like, but this is what the Spotlight indexer works off of. So this is our target format for all these mappings that we're doing at Traject.
So based on the metadata formats and sources provided by Wayne, we've been trying to do a mapping from those sources to our IR, or intermediate representation records for the Spotlight objects. It's a balance between trying to map pretty straightforward schema to schema needs, mods to this, FGDC, whatever. It's a balance between that and knowing enough about the specific practices of the source for fields like how to generate a AAAF service link, or they use this title in this way, not that way. So we're trying not to go too far down those rabbit holes, but for the sake of getting links for the interface parts of, or the viewing parts of Spotlight, we're tiptoeing around some of that. Those have been set up to try to map as much as possible based off of some sort of path notation for the originating data representation, so that we can more easily dump them into a Traject config file. And I mean, one of the reasons we looked at Traject, and we can go into this, is that we would like to have these mappings go into some sort of config-based conversion process, so that we can add source-specific field information, like where it's from, or here's how to, the AAAF logic needed to get those fields from the provided URL, or whatever it may be. Have those in a config that has a DSL. And that resulted in the very long pull request that is our first complete pass at one of those conversion processes, leveraging Traject and really expanding it to be able to support not just a non-mark source, since Traject is more built for mark to Solr conversion. So a non-mark source, your mods to something other than a flat document. So the IR model.
And once we've converted these records into the IR, we have a process to index them into Solr and do some transformations within Solr to make these records a little more discoverable. And right now, most of this work is completely unvalidated as we're waiting to load some records in and get a better handle on what's going on. But we've developed analyzers for Arabic, Persian, and Turkish texts, which will increase the discoverability in those scripts and languages. And we're copying things like titles and creators and contributors into that, and making them available for full text searching.